Welcome back to the Indian Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Raj Balkaran, and today we're going to dive into something that is as perennial as it is elusive. That is creativity, the creative process, creative inspiration, and we will look to a fascinating text, a vignette from the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa, from the story of Rama, whereby verse itself is birthed. This is the birth of verse. And this verse, this primordial verse, this first verse is actually a curse verse, an act of creativity that is actually cursing someone else to die. What does this mean? What are the circumstances of the arising of this verse? And most importantly, what does this tell us about our lives, inner and outer? What does this tell us about the creative process? Whether in terms of what we can understand about it, or for those among you who are yourselves creatives, how can we emulate it? What can we learn experientially about the creative process? So once upon a time, the great sage Vālmīki. There are many versions of the story of Rama, the Rāmāyaṇa, and the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa is the oldest Sanskrit articulation of the text. Much to be said about that, but I will not digress into scholarly quibbles and lecture herein. Let's stay a little bit focused on the story. So once upon a time, the great sage Vālmīki posed the following question to Narada, divine celestial being, Narada, said, is there a man in the world? Is there someone who is truly virtuous? Is there such a person who knows the ways of righteousness, who is truly virtuous in the world? And without hesitation, Narada answered Vālmīki, oh, yes, of course there is. His name is Rama, the beloved, noble Rama. And Narada went on to extol the virtues of Rama and tell, indeed, the career, the story, the overarching tale of Rama, how, due to some political palace intrigue, on the very day of his would-be coronation, he accepts exile into the Dandaka wilderness for 14 long years. And his wife Sita accompanies him, as does his sidekick, loyal brother Lakshmana, and they have various adventures. And one of those adventures or misadventures is actually the abduction of Sita by Ravana, a demon king who is the king of the citadel on Lanka. Okay. Rama wages a cataclysmic war to win her back, right? Etc., etc., etc. So there are some really, really fascinating aspects of the story of Rama, and the popularity and the longevity of this story cannot be overstated. Throughout the South Asian world and the Indic diaspora, the story of Rama is known by all, and it has been so for a great many centuries. Indeed, statistically speaking, more human beings who have walked the earth have known the story of Rama than those who have known the story of Moses. Think of how impactful and how popular and seminal the story of Moses is to all Abrahamic traditions. More people have walked the earth who have known the story of Rama. So it's a powerful and compelling tale of a great many things. Perhaps it is a tale of virtue. Perhaps it is a tale of intrigue, of loss, etc., etc., etc. But the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa starts in this manner where Vālmīki, the primordial poet, he's able to receive the content of the story of Rama, the career, the biography. This is an intellectual endeavor. This pertains to his intellectual self, whereby he is gaining knowledge with respect to and in response to his query. The greater the query, the more capacity for greatness of exposition. Yes. So this is one of the bijas. Okay. This is the seminal bija having to do with content. What is the tale of Rama about? And Vālmīki's question, by virtue of the principles of framing and the compositional strategies at play, which help to guide hearers and listeners and readers towards interpretation. Virtue is crucial. This is a tale about a virtuous man. Now, you may not all agree about that. There may be some questionable decisions to be had. And go forth and question, be vexed and perplexed. If the story was simple, it would not have survived over 2 millennia. You see. And so in the first canto, if you will, Vālmīki attains the content of the tale. But the telling of the tale on behalf of a true storyteller is far, far, far more than content. The mechanics of these first four cantos of the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa put together for the attentive reader the very mechanics of creative inspiration and the creative enterprise. And crucial to this is emotionality, feeling, bhava. Art is about experience. It's about an experience to be had. Art forms are catalysts of human experience, of the depth and nuance and complexity and profundity of human experience. However intelligent the art might be, however sophisticatedly structured and balanced the symphony might be, Mozart's prowess is his knowledge of the human heart, for example. So the story goes, having heard this transmission from Narada about the tale of Rama, Vālmīki goes off into the woods with his pupil by his side. His pupil is actually Bharadwaja. And he's going off to do his morning rituals, right? By the banks of the Ganges. He was looking for a bathing spot which was free of mud. What does this remind you of? Clear water flowing, free of mud. Is the lucidity of water perhaps lucidity of mind and mind stuff? Free of mud, clarity of thought. Yes. So they found a lovely bathing spot, and the water jar was set down, and Vālmīki was doing his thing in terms of his morning rituals. Okay. And he was really enchanted by the flora and fauna about him. He was sort of in rapture at the glory of nature, its charm. You know, the birds and the bees and these beautiful, luscious flowers all about him, the gurgling of the stream. He spotted a pair of cranes, not just any cranes, but saras cranes. Saras cranes are the largest water bird in South Asia. They are fairly tall, really 4 feet tall. They're majestic, they're elegant, and they mate for life. Now, in the Sanskrit text, the word kroncha is used, and that can be translated in a number of ways. You know, it's more of a generic term for something along the lines of crane. There's a brilliant, to my mind, brilliant article by one Julia Leslie, who has done a great deal of work to argue that the particular cranes were these majestic saras cranes, and that really adds value to the story, and it adds value to what Vālmīki was perceiving. It adds insight into the depth of experience that the reader, the hearer, the listener is called to experience when you're beholding these, lifelike, majestic, regal cranes engaged in their elaborate courtship rituals. Vālmīki was just admiring the majesty and the coordination and the elegance of these creatures engaged in their courtship, engaged in the act of mating, right? And their mating rituals in general. Now, admiring their beauty and capacity to love, Vālmīki was suddenly saddened. He was in despair when out of nowhere, a hunter's arrow pierced the scene, slaughtering the male of the pair. Male of the pair left bloody on the ground. The female in shock and despair and agony wailing for her fallen mate. A moment of connection, eclipsed and sullied by unending separation. Right? There's this theme of tremendous suffering, of the separation of male and female within the pair. Perhaps this is foreshadowing of the fate of Rama and Sita. Perhaps it is Sita who's left wailing. We'll speak more about this momentarily. but without even thinking, just ensconced in his compassion, his pity, his karuna, his sort of momentary identification with and suffering alongside of this agonizing Saras crane, some words escaped his lips. Thought to himself, oh, this is terrible. He was outraged, but also deeply saddened. And some words escaped from his lips spontaneously. And the words were, perhaps in a manner calling after the wailing of the crane, Ma nishada patishtam, tomagama shashvati samaha, hit kaunchamudanadekam avadihi kamamotam. This came out of him. They sort of, there was a meter to them, there was a cadence to them, there was a rhythm to them. They just emerged. And the content of the words, essentially, he was talking to the hunter, the Nishada. He said, since you killed one of this pair of crouches distracted at the height of passion, you shall not live for very long. So his creative enterprise is actually ensconced in an act of destruction. How fascinating is this? And he thought to himself, wow, stricken with grief for this bird, what is this that I have uttered? By the way, the synopsis translations are from the stories behind the poses. And when I take a bit of a deeper dive into the text, I'm looking at Robert Goldman's translation of the Balakanda, of the first book of the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa, because of course this is the very, very beginning of the text. Upon reflection, that wise and thoughtful man came to a conclusion. Then that bull among sages spoke these words to his disciple. So he says to his disciple, it's a teaching moment, fixed in metrical quarters, each with a like number of syllables, and fit for the company of stringed and percussive instruments, the utterance I have produced in this access of shoka, of grief, shall be called shloka, verse, poetry, nothing else. So shloka, verse, is born of shoka, grief. Clearly the motif of the suffering artist or creative is by no means new. Emotionality is indispensable to the artistic enterprise. You take your broken heart, and if you're lucky, turn it into art like that. And so he went on, certainly when things sort of traumatize us and stay with us, perhaps he was preoccupied, but he went on with his day and took care of whatever he needed to take care of in the ashram, etc., etc. And then what happens next is fascinating. He is visited. He is visited by someone very special. He is visited by Brahma himself, the creator himself. A tale about creativity featuring the creator himself. The mighty four-faced Lord Brahma himself, the maker of worlds, came to see the bull among sages. Seeing him, Vālmīki rose quickly and without a word. He stood subdued and greatly wonder-struck, his hands cupped in reverence. Then he worshipped the god, offering water for his feet, the welcome offering, a seat, and hymns of praise. When he had made the prescribed prostration before him, i.e. Brahma, he asked after his continued well-being. Once the Holy Lord was seated in a place of honor, he mentioned the great Vālmīki also should have a seat. And what did they exchange about? They exchanged about the crunches. They exchanged about what happened earlier. Vālmīki was so distracted by this thought that he had to share the tale of what he witnessed and what came out of him. What came from him? What came through him, perhaps? Because Brahma says this with a smile. This is shloka that you have composed. You needn't be perplexed about this, Brahman. It was by my will alone that you produced this elegant speech. What does that mean? It is by my will alone. Anyone who has been fortunate enough to be an instrument of creativity palpably understands in an experiential manner that inspiration is something that does not come from us, but like lightning, it strikes where it will. And you're very lucky to be struck by it twice. But it comes from who knows where, and it comes through us. So he says, it's by my will alone that you were so inspired to create verse. Greatest of seers, you must now compose the entire history of Rama. You must tell the world the story of the righteous, virtuous, wise, and steadfast Rama, just as you heard it from Narada, the full story, public and private, of that wise man, for all that befell the wise Rama, whether in public or private, will be revealed to you, even those events of which you are ignorant. No utterance of yours in this poem shall be false. Now compose the holy story of Rama, fashioned into shlokas to delight the heart. And then he says, it's beautiful, as long as the mountains and rivers shall endure upon the earth, so long will the story of Rama, the Rāmāyaṇa, be told among men. And as long as the story of Rama you compose is told, so long will you live on in my worlds above and below. There's so much there, this idea of longevity through creativity, through the artistic enterprise. This brilliant mythologization of a psychic process, of a psychospiritual process. The aesthetic experience is just a hair split away from the spiritual experience, to my mind, to my heart, to my being. And where one ends and the other begins, who knows? There are those whose spirituality is artistry itself, for example. Yes. And so this artistry, both artistry and spirituality, require a subtleness of consciousness, require one to be sensitive, porous, to what is not necessarily stula, gross, material, but sukshma, subtle. Requires one to be sensitive, receptive, porous to layers of existence which are subtle. And to access that subtlety and give it voice, the music or song, or give it expression through visual art, embody it perhaps through dance, and then thereby inviting, if not compelling, the onlooker, the hearer, the seer, the experiencer to partake in that very subtleness, which the artist has channeled in mind. And so we have here, the very first section of the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa talking about the content, the story. What is your story about? What is the structure? What we'll be talking about? And then the very second piece that has to come is perhaps the form, the verse form, and the emotionality around that. With which emotions will you tell your tale? Right? So there's an intellectual enterprise. For those of you who are aware of kosha theory, or the layers that make up the self, the human complex, the various selves which we are, above and beyond the physical self, the annamaya kosha, the self made of food, the food body, the sheath made of food. We have a vijnanamaya kosha, an intellectual self, and perhaps Vālmīki was feeding his intellectual self at the outset with this query, who among us is truly virtuous? But then we also have a manamaya kosha, the manas, the mind, the heart. Really, to my mind, to my heart, to my manas, maybe even to my intellect, the primary stage of the human experience, the human condition, is the manamaya kosha, the emotions that we feel as human beings. And so that aspect of self is fed, is engaged through Vālmīki's experience of karuna, of pity, of compassion for this suffering Saraskrane, which actually we will see symbolically is a stand-in for Sita herself, Rama's partner, his wife Sita. Right? This is an omen. This is both an omen of the tale to come, and this is the bija, this is the seed which sprouts the tale. So this is crucial. This having a grasp of this seminal exchange, as vignette, is crucial not only for having a grasp of poetics and creative enterprise, but it's absolutely crucial for an understanding of the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa, at least with respect to how Vālmīki himself perceives it, at least with respect to his perspective, and perhaps by virtue thereof, how he intends us to receive it. Okay, there's lots of opportunity for query and questioning and problematization and discussion regarding reader response theory and the intent of an author, etc., etc. There's lots there to chew on, and we'll leave the pedantic stuff for another forum. But there's something very powerful about the way in which this epic mythologizes, illumines, illustrates the creative process. Okay, this verse that Vālmīki puts forth, it's considered the primordial verse, the first verse, and the first verse is a curse. Right. So Rama, Vālmīki goes ahead and writes the story of Rama, of his 14 long years of exile in the forest, of Sita's abduction. It's an epic tale. It's far too vast to be even sufficiently summarized here. But worth noting towards the end is this theme of separation. The bookends of the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa feature separation. This foremost front end bookend features the separation of the Kraunchas. What happens is that Sita ends up being tested. Her purity is questioned. Having been in captivity for so long under the control of another man, etc., etc., etc. If this plot twist intrigues and or enrages you, great. You would not be the first. This is not just the sensibilities of moderns who have been vexed and perplexed by a couple of the vignettes of the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa, most famously or infamously his separation from Sita, and also his slaying of Valin, the monkey man, the Vanara Valin, from hiding. He executes somebody from hiding. Sita's purity is called into question, and she calls upon fire. And she walks through fire, and fire burns away what is impure, and not a strand of the hair of the pure noble Sita is burnt by fire. So she's already been tested. But of course, people being people and humans being humans, the world's been filled with darlings and dolts. And sometimes both in the same body forever. This isn't new. Pettiness is not new. Lowbrowness is not new. Once their exile was over and they returned to court to rule, the issue of the widespread gossip about Sita's fidelity became unavoidable for Rama. It was creating instability in the realm. Right? And he was king, and his primary duty was to secure the stability of the realm. Yes. Despite all Sita had done to prove herself, and despite the fact that she was pregnant with twins, fathered by Rama, of course, he sent her away to preserve the stability of the realm. Eventually, she would seek solace in the ashram of, you guessed it, Vālmīki. So one of the most brilliant motifs in the Sanskrit epics is that the authors themselves are characters in the epics. And I think this has profound psychospiritual symbolism in terms of the collapse of the story you're telling. And your role in that story in terms of embodied experience. Yeah, there's so much to be said about being participating in the very story you're telling. So it's actually Vālmīki's ashram where Sita seeks solace or finds solace upon being, for all intents and purposes, abandoned by Rama. And so it's Vālmīki who is identifying with, perhaps, or we can say empathizing with the suffering of Sita, just as he was empathizing with the suffering of the Saras once the male of the pair was fallen, and she was left alone to wail in separation. The story of Rama and Sita is very much a story of separation. And so this is the hue, this is the flavor, the rasa, this is the experience with which the work is imbued. It is not a comedy. It is a tragedy, perhaps. Ironically, you have the ideal king, God on earth in human form, here to rule. But is it a utopia? I don't think so, although it's described as utopic in many ways. I think part of the brilliance of the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa is the subtle and subversive ways in which the rule of Rama is presented as dystopic, not least of which for Rama himself. Because, Rama might be of high consciousness, perhaps, but what about the citizens? Are they petty? Are they foolish? Are they ignorant? Etc., etc., etc. And so this is the story of the Saras crane and Vālmīki's engagement with this crane to birth Sanskrit verse. What can you take away from this? Whether you are a student, a lifelong student, maybe one who just enjoys such ideas, maybe one engaged in the creative enterprise, maybe one even engaged in website copy or marketing, or who knows what sort of communication. What can you take away pertaining to the aspects of self implicated in the creative process and its products? What can you take away about the content piece engaging the intellectual self and the emotional piece engaging, how would you say that? The emotional self, even the mental self, the manas. How about the inspiration coming from the spiritual self? How about the extent to which when we receive inspiration, receive, not manufacture, not create, not generate, not put forth, not manifest. When we receive inspiration, where does it come from? Is it a calling? Is it something that we have the luxury of not heeding? Right? How do we dovetail the receipt of inspiration in the spiritual self with the processing and integration and celebration of emotions in the mental self, or emotional self, with the processing and playing with ideas in the intellectual self? How do they all come together? And when they do, how beautiful, how powerful that process is, how impactful that product is. So perhaps you've received some food for thought and maybe even some inspiration. Who knows? Who knows? We live to inform and entertain and perhaps even inspire. Hopefully, this deliberation will result in clarity and perhaps even productivity in your enterprises, be they intellectual or spiritual, or most certainly creative. Until next time, keep well, take good care of yourself. Feel free to reach out if you have requests for content pertaining to where the wisdom of ancient India can be used to ameliorate, to support, to illumine modern life, living in these times of ours. Feel free to come study with me at the Indian Wisdom School. Maybe even see me in person at a retreat. All right, take good care. Namaste for now.